Admiral McGinn, in trying to get to the truth of the climate change situation, I am reminded of several ice ages ago, or the last one, when the warming was faster than this one, and there were no carbons, man-made carbons in the air or something like that. I just can't help wondering if perhaps it's just not the acts of God that and the natural ways of warming and cooling that is happening to our Earth.
You know, some days I wake up and I feel like I must have been a midshipman during those early warming periods. But it's a really good question because, and it goes to this question of, is global warming real or climate change real? And if it is, what can we do about it? And if it is, as some people think, natural cycle of nature that is over very, very long periods, what can we do? Well, let's assume that it is. And then ask ourselves, is man-made emission of greenhouse gases part of the problem or part of the solution? Perhaps not the primary cause of the problem, but certainly an additive factor, something that could make it happen faster, intensify it perhaps, because we have never ever before had 7 billion people on this planet as we will in about a year's time. We've got 6.8 or so now. That's never happened. We've never had however many people with the carbon intensity per capita that is occurring around the world today. And oh, by the way, we've never had as high a quality of life, and those two things are related. So I would say, in a prudent way, in that military sense of don't wait for 100% certainty about what the precise cause is and exactly what the consequences are, let's acknowledge that it is likely, based on the science we are hearing, that we are having an additive effect on whatever natural cycle may be happening, and take prudent actions, not stop economic growth, not degrade our quality of life or the quality of life advances that are happening in developing countries, but let's consider prudent actions. There was a great conversation private conversation, which has become a little more public, and I'll make it more public today, between Prime Minister Tony Blair and President Bush. Tony Blair said to President Bush, who they disagreed on this whole business of climate change and what should be done about it. And Tony Blair said to President Bush, what if we're wrong? What if we who believe that man is causing this climate change, or a good portion of it, are wrong? What is not to like about squeezing much more economic value and quality of life out of every unit of electricity we use, whether it's a gallon of gasoline or a kilowatt hour of electricity? What is wrong with having more of a sense of control of our own energy future in this country? What is wrong with eliminating a lot of the local and regional aspects of fossil fuel production and use that we have seen, and in some cases have corrected beautifully? A lot of the debate going back several years to the Clean Air Act said, can't be done, it'll be too expensive, electricity prices will go through the roof, not necessary. Yet Cleveland and this whole Great Lakes area, eastward to the Atlantic Ocean through New England, is far, far better off because of the Clean Air Act, as are many other places around the country. I can remember back in the 70s driving through Los Angeles. At least I thought it was Los Angeles because of the street signs, but I couldn't see anything because of the thickness of the smog. And today, to go out there, even with probably 3 to 4 times more vehicles on the roads, you can actually see the wonderful mountains around that beautiful city. So I think we need to recognize, if we're wrong about climate change, but we take prudent actions as a hedge, if you will, that fire insurance policy, I think we're going to be in great shape for all other reasons as well.
Admiral, up until about 100+ years ago, salt was a strategic asset, and countries that had salt had a great deal of control over international commerce. Then we got refrigeration. thanks to electricity, and salt became not a strategic asset. About 6 years ago, I believe, in an inaugural address, President Bush, following that same idea to diminish the importance of oil, said, we're going to develop hydrogen fuel cells, and that's going to replace the internal combustion engine. And yes, it's going to take a long time, but that's how we are going to overcome our dependence on foreign sources of energy. He said it would take maybe 20 years to do it. Well, that's about 6 years ago. We're 30% of the way down the road. Can you share with us any progress in the idea of replacing the internal combustion engine?
Harkening back to my remark that there isn't a silver bullet, but there's silver buckshot, hydrogen fuel cells at this point are a very small piece of buckshot, but one that we need to pay attention to. It will not, in my best judgment, over the next 20 years, make a significant dent in our addiction to oil. There are many other ways of doing that. We're starting to see them now. The passage in 2007 of the corporate average fuel economy standards for cars and light trucks, by creating a standard of 35 miles per gallon by 2020, and then last May, as a result of the cooperation and the forming of a coalition of environmentalists, automobile manufacturers, and government, actually moved that finish line up 4 years to 2016. That will have a tremendous effect, a motivating effect, a stable policy effect on reducing the transportation demand on oil, which is the largest demand that it has. And I think that we're seeing things like hybrids, of course. Now, thank goodness, some of them being made right here in the United States by our automobile manufacturers. And the choices for Americans for very safe, very usable automobiles and trucks with much higher energy efficiency and gas mileage is starting to grow. That was a key message that came out of the Detroit Auto Show this week. And I think that will go a long way to being the, shall we say, the oil equivalent of the discovery of refrigeration, which made salt less of a strategic asset. I would also like to say in the same vein that there was a quote by a former Saudi oil minister talking about this problem, and he said, "We must remember that the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones."
Admiral, can you give us some specific proposals as to how you would deal short-term with the reduction of greenhouse gases? Is the way to do it to levy a tax on carbon? Is it a cap-and-trade system? Is it by governmental decree? How would you propose to do it with financial incentives to those charged with carrying it out?
I'm certainly not in a position to recommend specific legislative solutions, but I will just say generally we need to adequately recognize the price we are already paying for fossil fuel, those that are direct and those that are the so-called externalities that economists talk about, and somehow capture that and put a real price on carbon. And I think whatever form that takes, that considers the short-term transitional turbulence that could be created, but more importantly, the long-term economic and environmental and national security benefits is the way to go. I mean, this is at the heart of the debate that is going on in the Senate and, in fact, across the Congress. And I think, though, that the principle I would ask all of our elected officials to ask themselves is, if we look back in 20 years at the legislation that we passed today, are we going to be more secure? Is there going to be less greenhouse gas emissions? Are we going to be more prosperous? If we can adhere to those principles and say, you know, the best thing we did was we avoided doing nothing.